Good morning. That was not like hymns when I was growing up. That was awesome. But I'm 60, so what do I know? Yeah. So my name's Dave Nystrom. I'm not really a family member, but I think I am. So, like, if this were your house, you'd find me like, I let myself in. I'm eating your ice cream. So over the past couple of years, I've only been here maybe 3 or 4 times a year to preach. So Dave Nystrom, I'm a covenant pastor, but my job is I'm a professor of New Testament, primarily at Western Seminary.
You're our brother in Christ.
That also, yeah. And but so you may have known I'm limp. So real quick, 5 weeks ago, driving to a church to preach. Busy road, 55-mile-an-hour speed limit, rainy. Guy lost control going the other way, came across the median, hit me head on. So, and then pushed my car into the next lane where somebody else behind me also hit me. So 3 cars, 4 people, we all survived, but I've got problems. So I actually have a broken kneecap. I didn't know that for 2 weeks. And I've also got, I just hurt all over. So anyway, so that's what that is all about. So, okay, I've told you who I am. I told you who I am, right? Yeah, I did that. Okay. I guess next slide is where we're going. So this is our text for today, John 12. It's the account of the so-called triumphal entry. Palm Sunday. It's the story of Jesus arriving at Bethany, which is across the Kidron Valley, a little bit higher than Jerusalem. And the Mount of Olives is on that side of the Kidron Brook. Then he's going to descend into the Kidron Valley and go back up into Jerusalem. Next slide. So you can tell that's my finger on the side. So I do wedding photography too, in case you're interested. So this is the view of Jerusalem from across the way, the Mount of Olives. So you can see you descend down. You have to descend down and then come back up. And that golden dome, that's the Dome of the Rock. That's where the temple stood 2,000 years ago. Next slide. So here's a shot from the other direction. Now we're in Jerusalem looking across the Kidron Valley up to the Mount of Olives. That's the high point. And you can see at the very top, off to the left, there are some trees. That's the very top of the Garden of Gethsemane. So that's the little, just orient yourself a little bit. Next slide. So here's the text. The next day, the great crowd that had come from the festival heard that Jesus was on his way to Jerusalem. They took palm branches and went out to meet him, shouting, "Hosanna! Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Blessed is the King of Israel." Jesus found a young donkey and sat on it, as it is written, "Don't be afraid, daughter Zion. See, your king is coming, seated on a donkey's colt." At first, the disciples didn't understand all this. Only after Jesus was glorified did they realize that these things had been written about him and that these things had been done to him. Now, the crowd that was with him when he called Lazarus from the tomb and raised him from the dead continued to spread the word. Many people, because they had heard that he had performed this sign, went out to meet him. So the Pharisees said to one another, "Dude, this is getting us nowhere. The whole world's gone after him." Next slide. So what do you see? What strikes you? Totally, yeah, wild exuberance. They're super excited, like kids, at Christmas. What else do you see? Yep, there's prophecy. Yeah, I mean, yeah, they're like their plans are just nothing, being destroyed. Yes, I'm sorry.
The disciples are clueless bystanders.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Yeah, clueless and bystanders. I mean, it's astonishing how slow they are in the uptake, right? I mean, Jesus is crucified. They're totally depressed. they see Jesus, beginning of Acts, Jesus is resurrected, and they say, this is awesome. Are you now going to restore the kingdom of Israel? Like they still think it's about an earthly kingdom. Next slide. So I'm going to say this is about three main themes today. Palm branches, what do they mean? The suffering king, and then suffering. Those are the three themes we're going to cover today. Totally exciting, suffering. Next slide. So the palm branches, next slide. So the triumphal entry, it's told in all four Gospels, and there's background, Zechariah 9:9, 1 Maccabees 13:51, so Maccabees is an intertestamental book, and then 2 Kings 9:13. So 1 Maccabees is the palm branches, 2 Kings 9:13 is the cloaks. Next slide. Zechariah 9:9. Rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion. Shout aloud, O daughter of Jerusalem. Look, your king comes to you triumphant and victorious is he, humble and riding on a donkey, on a colt, the foal of a donkey. So that's clearly part of the background that Jesus wants to weave into what he's about to do. 2 Kings. Then hurriedly they all took their cloaks and spread them for him on the bare steps, and they blew the trumpet and proclaimed, Jehu is king. So what's the background? Jezebel was the queen, right? I mean, the archetypal evil ruler. And she's just been pushed out of the way, and they've got a new king. So they are ludicrously happy. And so what they do on that same road, up a hill to the city, they say, let's put down our cloaks. Next slide. So then Maccabees. On the 23rd day of the second month, the Jews entered it, Jerusalem, with praise and palm branches, with harps and cymbals. So the Maccabees, this was 150 years before Jesus was born. The Jews had been under the control of a series of kingdoms that succeeded Alexander the Great. And the Maccabees began this guerrilla war. I mean, it'd be as if, Turlock defeated the entire United States Army or something. And just incredible, just unbelievable. I mean, this ragtag group, and they kick out the second most powerful nation on the face of the planet. And to celebrate that they have their own kingdom back, on the way up to Jerusalem, the very road Jesus is on, they put down palm branches. Next slide. So Matthew has cloaks and palm branches. Mark has cloaks and palm branches. Luke just has cloaks. John just has palm branches. Next slide. So what I'm saying here is both of this symbol is saying to Jesus, you kick out the Romans. The cloaks and the palm branches both refer to getting rid of a hostile tyrant and putting political control back in our hands. That's the meaning they intend. But Jesus has a little bit different understanding. I'm calling it the suffering king. Next slide. So Jesus' favorite self-designation is Son of Man. He never, ever calls himself Messiah. He thinks he is. He knows he is. Other people call him that, and he agrees, but he doesn't ever choose to use that phrase of himself. His favorite, 82 times in the Gospels, is Son of Man. And that is connected to the suffering servant idea. No one had done that before. No one had put together messiahship with suffering servant. To us, it's natural, because we're way past the story. But when Jesus did it, no one had done that before. Next slide. So, Son of Man, his favorite self-designation, never called himself Messiah, almost exclusively on the lips of Jesus, and the phrase dies out after the Gospels. So that's another proof that it's original to Jesus. He actually called himself that. Next slide. So, 3 questions. Why didn't he call himself Messiah? Number 1. Number 2, why Son of Man? And number 3, what did he mean by it? So, next slide. So, why not Messiah? Next slide. Well, like I said, they had a really clear understanding. You remember the story in John when he feeds 5,000 people with a couple of Happy Meals, and they go nuts, and they say, let's make him king. And they actually say they wanted to take him by force and make him king. So, he couldn't reason with them. So if he called himself Messiah, they would never listen to him try to explain himself. Does that make sense? Next slide. Okay, so why Son of Man? Next slide. Why not Batman? Or the Tick, that'd be my favorite. Next slide. Well, because I'm going to use a trip to Home Depot. So I go to Home Depot sometimes when I'm bored and I don't really want to be doing the things I'm supposed to be doing. So, and I know Home Depot pretty well. I know where the air compressors are. I've never used an air compressor. I'm not planning to use one, but I know where they are. I have a basic idea of what they do. There's stuff there I do buy, but other stuff, but I know my way around. And so Jesus picked Son of Man because it was a relatively unused idea among his contemporaries, but there was stuff in the Old Testament that he knew they could recognize. Like I recognize an air compressor. Next slide. So what did he mean by it? Next slide. So background. Genesis 1:27, God creates human beings and we are made in his image. Angels are not made in God's image. We are. And God calls us Son of Man. So that man of the human. It could be translated child of the human. Psalm 8. The psalmist says, when I consider the heavens, the moon, and the stars that you have established, what is man that you care for him, the Son of Man that you pay attention to him, yet you have made him. And some translations in English say a little lower than yourself, but that's not what the original says. The original says you've made him a little lower than angels, but the original says you've made him a little lower than yourself. That's Genesis 1. We are the ones made in God's image. And then Daniel 7. This is a complex passage. Daniel 7 is like the beginning of Jaws, the movie. Right? It's pitch black and there's that music. So Daniel 7 has it's night. That bad stuff happens at night. Freddy Krueger does not attack, at noon in Safeway. Nighttime. So night, bad stuff happens. And it's the sea. The sea is symbolic of chaos in their symbol system. So that's dangerous. That's why Jonah goes out over the sea. If there's any place where God doesn't have power, it's the sea in Jonah's mind. And the sea is disturbed. There's a wild storm. This is like saying, this is bad, bad, bad. Danger, Will Robinson. This is a horrible situation. Out of the sea come beasts, and beasts represent political power, right? The American eagle, right? The lion of the British Empire. We even do that with college mascots, right? The Nittany Lions and the banana slugs of the. We'll slime you to death. And what is being connected here, what is being conveyed here is the idea that God trusted us. I'm giving you the earth. I'm putting it into your hands. I'm making you responsible. And before you get 3 chapters into Genesis, we have foolishly let Satan into the house. We've given him the keys, and now he's got the power, just like a burglar who breaks into your house while you're on vacation. They can turn up the heater and the air conditioner all at the same time. They have the power, not the right, but they have the power. You'll notice when Jesus and Satan are discussing in the temptations, he has the power, but Jesus does not admit he does not say he has the right. He's got the power of a burglar who's in your house while you're gone. So God says, okay, this is what's happened. I've trusted you human beings. You foolishly let Satan into the mix, and you've created systems that dehumanize. And so God says, I've had enough. And he takes power away from the beasts and gives it to, quote, one like a son of man. And the Son of Man, it says, will come to earth and reestablish God's kingdom. And all peoples and nations will serve the Son of Man. So that's part of the background. But in Mark 10, Jesus says about the Son of Man, about himself, the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve and to give. So Jesus connects Daniel 7 with Isaiah 53, the suffering servant. No one had ever done that before. So the path to victory over Satan is not by matching him power for power, but by choosing weakness and suffering. Next slide. So what about suffering? Have you ever said, more suffering, please? Big steaming heap of suffering. What about suffering? Next slide. Well, Jesus also says, right, deny yourself. Take up your cross. So suffering is intrinsic to the Christian life. You know, you can't deny what you haven't recognized. And we're not really good at recognizing ourselves. And we are living in an age which has vastly multiplied the power of what we've created to amuse ourselves and keep us from thinking about stuff that's really important. So deny yourself. You can't deny what you haven't recognized. Take up your cross. Get ready. Because there's parts of me that aren't all that godly and Christian that need to be put to death. And then follow me, says Jesus. Next slide. So the theme of suffering is woven into the ministry of Jesus. Next slide. So this is, as you can see, Francis Fenelon. He was the Archbishop of Cambrai. He died, as you can see, 1715. Way ahead of his time. He wrote, I think published in 1700, he wrote a treatise advocating that girls receive a full education alongside boys. So I mean, he's like wacky ahead of his time. He was also a deeply insightful person in terms of prayer, and he was attacked by other Catholic bishops for being too Protestant sounding. So next slide, just a portion of what he wrote. It is certain from the Holy Scriptures that the Spirit of God dwells within us. There he acts. There he prays without ceasing, groans, desires, and asks for us what we do not know how to ask for ourselves. The Spirit urges us on, animates us, speaks to us when we are silent, suggests to us all truth, and unites us to him. God is continually speaking to us, but stunned by the noise of the world and the noise of our passions we often cannot hear. 1715, how noisy was his world? You know, the fastest you could go anywhere when he was alive was how fast the horse could take you. Was the same speed as, since the beginning of time. If he could say, I am having trouble finding enough space to let the Spirit speak in ways I can hear, what about us? I mean, vastly, by multiple measures, our world is more complicated. How can we create space? Next slide. So suffering. You know, James says, consider it pure joy, not a little bit of joy, pure joy whenever you encounter trials of many kinds. Isn't that how we respond? Awesome. Give me more disappointment. Yeah, that's great. That's what I like. And he says, you know, the Greek word is hupomene. So the verb meno is to abide, to stay, to remain. That's the word that Jesus used when he says, abide in me and I in you. So be fully connected. And hupo, like hyper. So not just stay in it, but hyper stay in it. You should be glad when you suffer because that gives you an opportunity to learn. The great Greek playwright Aeschylus wrote in his Agamemnon. He's probably the most important of the great Attic poets, playwrights. It's the will. It's the first stanza. It's a first act. It's the will of the gods that those who learn wisdom must suffer. And even in our sleep, pain which we cannot forget falls drop by drop upon the heart until with it, unbidden and against our will, comes wisdom by the awful grace of God. So what happens when we suffer? Well, it gives us the chance to slow down and think about our deeper selves. It carves out more space in our deeper selves. It gives us a chance to develop empathy for others. It ain't going to happen automatically, but we can develop empathy for others. It gives us a chance to recognize our own brokenness, our own screwed upness. It gives us a chance to recognize that we are addicted to the empire of me. It gives us a chance to think about what really matters and to amend our patterns and reorient to connect with others. Because that's what we really want. Next slide. And what do you learn in the midst of suffering? Well, our culture is all about hyper-personal freedom. Well, it might not be so awesome after all. Political freedom's great. Social freedom and personal freedom, maybe not so great. Because ultimately you're left alone. You're disconnected from others, you're alone and uncommitted. It turns out we want connection with others. And that means we have to be happy about not getting our way all the time. Might be good for us not to get our way all the time. Doing something for someone else might be actually better than what we were planning ourselves. Suffering reveals who we really are instead of who we thought we were. Next slide. When you suffer, you are either broken or you're broken open. When you are broken and simply remain broken, you get smaller, you get afraid, and you lash out. Pain is either transformative or you transmit it. Next slide. But when you suffer, like I said, you're either broken or broken open. When you're broken open, your pain carves through what you thought was the bottom of your soul, and you realize there's something beneath that. You are forced to stop and learn about yourself, about the parts of you that ain't wonderful, but the selfish bits and the pettiness. And you begin to see there's something more than the superficial things we've been focusing on. Suffering carves open the space beneath what you thought was your bottom, and then another space below that. Next slide. And that only spiritual meaning can fill it. You discover your heart, and what you really desire is relationship with one another, with God. Love is what's left when being in love is burned away. So I'd like to ask you to look around the people that are part of this family. Hillside Covenant. This, you can start looking around now. So, these are your family. And we all have got to work to put to death the selfish self. But the Spirit of the living God that comes and lives within us because of what Jesus accomplished, the crucifixion and resurrection. I'm going to send another comforter. You will know him because he is with you and will be in you. It's because of the resurrection the Spirit can actually come and live within us instead of just dwelling on people occasionally. Let's make more space for that Spirit and live into the community, the family of faith that is God's purpose for us. Not to be isolated and alone, but to be connected in vibrancy and love and true peace. Next slide. Yeah, let's skip a bunch more because that's too many. Next. See, isn't this awesome? We're just going over this stuff. Next. So the bottom line is we need rescue. We need rescue from ourselves. We need rescue from the attraction of the world. And we need rescue from our enemy, Satan. Now, he's been defeated at the cross, the crucifixion and resurrection, but he's still mean-spirited and dangerous. So we need rescue. We have been set free from those things that have captured us, but we're also set free for. Let's live into those. And remember, we cannot save ourselves. The triumphal entry is this pastiche of symbols. They want a kingdom their way. What they get is the kingdom they need. It's the kingdom we need. Let's join that kingdom. Father God, we thank you for your love for us. You understand us and you don't vaporize us. But in your compassion, you have reached out to save us from the world, from Satan, and from ourselves. May we forget what lies behind and walk forward into the beauty of your love and your grace and your purpose, we pray. And all God's people said,